In June 2016, the United Kingdom made a historic decision that changed its future forever. 52% of voters chose to leave the European Union, convinced by promises of sovereignty, prosperity, and better control over immigration. But years later, the reality has proven far more complex than promised. The question is, how did the grandest political experiment of our time unfold? What happened to those bold promises of economic freedom? Did Britain really take back control? And most importantly, what price did ordinary citizens pay for these political dreams? In this video, we'd uncover how Brexit transformed the nation for the worse. Let's go. In 2017, Brexit supporters were somewhat optimistic about Britain's trading future outside the European Union. At the time, Liam Fox, the International Trade Secretary, confidently declared that securing a deal with the European Union would be the easiest in human history. He believed that trade barriers would be non-existent, promising that new global markets would eagerly open their doors to British goods and commerce with Europe would continue as smoothly as ever. But the reality soon hit hard. The exports from Britain to the European Union decreased by almost £20 billion in 2021 compared to 2018, and several small and medium-sized businesses struggled with the suddenly increased regulations and paperwork. For example, before Brexit, a cheesemaker in Somerset would only take roughly a day to export his cheese to France without much paperwork. But now, each shipment consists of 10 pages of documents along with an additional £180 in paperwork fees, which is by all means too much of an increase in expense. Interestingly, the most controversial post-Brexit trade issue has been the Northern Ireland border. Leave campaigners insisted there would be no hard border on the island of Ireland. Yet maintaining an open border while leaving the EU's single market created an impossible puzzle. Surprisingly, there was a solution. The Northern Ireland Protocol was created, which in effect established a customs border along the Irish Sea, a situation where goods moving or coming from Great Britain to Northern Ireland would have to be checked. Exactly what Boris Johnson had promised would never happen. The Democratic Unionist Party, which initially supported Brexit, found itself facing the very outcome it had feared. A regulatory divide between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. Also, before Brexit, the City of London was the chief financial district in Europe and perhaps the world. Leave campaigners raised hopes that the city would do better when relieved of the shackles of EU policy, but the events that followed proved otherwise. By 2021, Amsterdam had overtaken London as Europe's largest share trading centre, and major banks moved €1.3 trillion in assets to EU financial centres like Frankfurt and Paris. Sadly, the consequences went beyond just figures. British financial firms lost their passporting rights, meaning they could no longer serve EU clients from London. Over 440 financial firms relocated some or all of their operations, employees, or assets. In actual fact, JP Morgan alone moved assets worth €200 billion to Frankfurt, and the promises of a deregulated financial paradise crumbled as the city found itself cut off from its largest market. Immigration is another arm that has suffered greatly since Brexit. Priti Patel, during her announcement of a new intelligence-based immigration system, claimed that it would change the overall picture, as only the brightest and the best would be welcomed and overall numbers would be reduced. The system was also meant to abolish free movement from Europe and allow Britain full control of its borders. But the results were unexpected. Ending free movement with Europe caused critical worker shortages across major industries. British farms had crops rot away because foreign seasonal workers were no longer available, and the hospitality industry could not find employees to fill the spots the Europeans used to have. Care homes were also severely understaffed. Unfortunately, both employees and businesses had to bear the high costs of the new system. Small companies that previously relied on cheap EU workers now have to use sponsorship, even though they are expensive. Meanwhile, British youth also lost the right to live, work, and study freely across 27 European countries like the previous generations. As time progressed, the hardships of Brexit began to take a toll on British universities as well. From being a major player in research with funding averaging £1.5 billion annually in EU research, the UK universities lost access to research networks. This caused a major shift as the number of EU students enrolling in British universities dropped by 50% in 2021. The impact on research was so severe that researchers left for EU institutions, taking their grants and expertise with them. Cambridge University alone reported losing 184 European researchers in the first 3 years after Brexit. Interestingly, Leave campaigners promised that Brexit would lower living costs by cutting EU red tape and allowing Britain to drop tariffs. The UK Economic Secretary, Michael Gove, also claimed food prices would fall, but shoppers soon faced a very different reality. New quotas led to an increase in the cost of imported goods. Fresh food prices rose as additional checks delayed perishable goods at ports. Before 2023 came to an end, Brexit had added £210 to the average household's annual food bill. Supermarket shelves also occasionally sat empty as supply chains adjusted to the new bureaucracy. The fact that Brexit supporters promised freedom from EU bureaucracy would spark an economic renaissance has remained a big joke. They promised that Britain would slash red tape while maintaining high standards. But in reality, companies in the UK have faced more paperwork, not less. British manufacturers now need separate certificates for the UK and EU markets. The new UKCA mark, which has replaced the EU CE marking, costs businesses an estimated £13 billion annually. The trade curbs also affected firms providing services, causing them to lose automatic recognition of professional qualifications across Europe. The pharmaceutical market is a stark example. The UK now requires separate approval processes for new medicines, leading to slower access to treatments. Several pharmaceutical companies prioritized EU approval over UK registration, meaning British patients waited longer for new drugs. Following the EU exit, advocates in Britain hoped for a time when they could blossom into Britain of global reach. There was mention of it being a renaissance on an immeasurable scale. Unfortunately, however, Britain's ability to influence diplomacy remained low. According to the report, Presidents Trump and Biden of the US, as well as China and several other leaders, preferred concluding contracts based on the EU single market. Regarding the anticipated US trade deal, it was never meant to happen, I guess. Trump and his administration insisted on making NHS facilities federally privatized, and when Joe Biden got elected, the priorities for the US changed. Instead of focusing on British-American trade relations, he decided to mend the relationship with the EU. The worst part is that the new trade deals Britain did secure largely replicated existing EU arrangements. The celebrated Japan deal was forecast to add just 0.07% to GDP over 15 years. The Australia deal faced criticism for undermining British farmers while offering minimal economic benefit. In 2024, the UK and Northern Ireland began to recognise the need for closer cooperation. The Windsor Framework was created to ease some Northern Ireland trade issues, but tensions remained. Britain's financial services still lacked full access to EU markets, scientists struggled with reduced collaboration opportunities, and small businesses faced continuing regulatory burdens. Brexit promised sovereignty without economic cost, global influence without European ties, and reduced immigration while filling the labour shortage. All of these proved impossible to deliver. Instead, Britain found itself negotiating a new relationship with its largest trading partner, but now from a position of reduced influence. The British manufacturing sector was also promised a bright future outside the EU's rules, but instead, auto manufacturers like Nissan and BMW warned of disrupted supply chains. In fact, the famous Mini plant in Oxford had to shut down temporarily due to parts shortages, with Honda closing its Swindon factory altogether, ending 35 years of UK production. The numbers tell the story. UK car production fell to its lowest level since 1956. And the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders reported that Brexit had cost the auto industry £800 million in lost trade by 2021. But small manufacturers were the most affected, as many couldn't afford the specialists needed to handle new customs requirements. While much emphasis was directed towards the trade of goods, Britain's massive services sector, which contributed about 80% of the economy, lost vital access to EU markets. This meant that architecture practitioners could no longer bid for EU projects, and the qualification of consulting companies were not valid. For dancers and musicians, new barriers touring Europe came up as well. The impact spread across every sector. While British Airlines lost the right to fly between EU cities, UK television broadcasters were required to obtain individual permits to broadcast across the EU, and legal firms had to scramble to accommodate European operations. Even though these developments did not make the headlines like empty supermarket shelves, their economic impact was profound. The truth is, Brexit didn't just change Britain's economy, it also transformed its society. Families fought at the dinner table while others squabbled over Facebook. The words Remainer and Leaver became part of identity politics, creating fractures even years after the referendum. Young people who voted to remain particularly felt betrayed because they lost the right to live and work across Europe. The older generation, who enjoyed education and research privileges, saw their children denied the same opportunities they had enjoyed. Meanwhile, older voters who largely supported Brexit watched as promised benefits failed to materialize. Brexit, no doubt, offers crucial lessons about modern democracy. While social media echo chambers promoted false information, The real experts were dismissed as prophets of doom when they warned of the negative impacts. Worse still, complex economic relationships were reduced to simple slogans. The promise that Britain could have its cake and eat it by maintaining all the benefits of EU membership while ending free movement and regulations proved impossible. Trade-offs, dismissed during the campaign, became unavoidable once negotiations began. By 2024, pragmatism began replacing ideology. Both sides recognized the need for closer cooperation in areas like security, research, and environmental protection. The question was no longer about rejoining the EU, but about finding a workable relationship that balanced sovereignty with economic reality. Some changes proved permanent. Britain's days as Europe's financial hub were over. Supply chains reorganized. Small businesses adapted or ceased European trade. But other areas showed promise. Britain's tech sector remained resilient. New opportunities emerged in green technology and artificial intelligence. While the major economic impacts of Brexit made the news, smaller but significant changes affected daily life in unexpected ways. For example, British pet owners discovered they needed expensive health certificates to take their dogs to Europe. Retired couples who dreamed of spending their golden years in Spain faced new visa requirements. Also, mobile phone companies reintroduced roaming charges that had been banned under EU rules. In addition, the art world felt invisible barriers rise. British orchestra tours to Europe became logistical nightmares, and small theatre companies cancelled European performances due to visa costs. It is quite sad that towns that relied on EU regional development funding saw promised government replacements fall short. Cornwall, which had been receiving £100 million annually from the EU, got just £1 million from the UK's Shared Prosperity Fund in its first year. And former mining communities in deprived coastal areas, many of which voted heavily for Brexit, lost vital regeneration funding. Likewise, Scottish seed potato farmers who previously exported 20,000 tonnes annually to the EU lost their entire European market due to new regulations. British beekeeper associations couldn't export queen bees to European colonies anymore, while small cheesemakers lost European protection for their traditional products. This is how the easiest trade deal in history became one of the most complex negotiations ever undertaken. Brexit no doubt stands as a tale of caution about the gap between political promises and economic reality. Yet, the story isn't over. Britain's future relationship with Europe continues to evolve. The challenge now is learning from past mistakes while building a new partnership based not on slogans and wishful thinking, but on realistic assessments of costs and benefits. So, is Great Britain still great? Let's see what you think in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this video, do give it a thumbs up. Also, please subscribe to this channel if you haven't for more exciting updates. See you soon.